And so this is all on kind of the investing side of the house. And then on the building side of the house, it really started with that tokenized money market fund. And yeah, so the term Benji relates to, one Benji token is one share of ownership in this money market fund that's on chain and fully on chain. No duplicate.
This content is brought to you by VeChain, which is a leading enterprise-grade Layer 1 public blockchain spearheading a digital revolution from a sustainable, highly scalable smart contract platform. The VeChain blockchain has many unique features, which makes it an ideal choice for Web3 applications. VeChain is working with many great enterprises such as PwC, Givenchy, BMW, and Walmart China. Most recently, they partnered with the Boston Consulting Group to build a revolutionary decentralized application ecosystem. I'm a big believer in this project. I have been since 2018. I've been a VET token holder for years. And this blockchain is highly scalable, great with security and speed, and it has low energy consumption. If you'd like to learn more about VeChain, please visit vchain.org. Link will be in the description. Hey folks, welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward, and joining me today is Christopher Jensen, who is the Director of Digital Asset Research for Franklin Templeton. Christopher, great to have you.
Thanks, Tony. Happy to be here.
Yeah, Christopher, I'm excited to speak with you. Franklin Templeton is certainly a power player and on Wall Street, and you've launched some very interesting digital asset tools, products, services, and much more. And I want to dive into that. But let's kick it off with your background. Tell us a bit about yourself and your professional background.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess like several, both at my firm and across some of our peers, I do have a TradFi background. So, always been involved on the buy side, principal investing for about 20 years now. A lot of that in credit, private credit, in particular. And then for the last probably 8, really at this intersection of technology and finance. And so, we were doing a lot of the early fintech activities for the firm, for Franklin. And, I think once you're at that tip of the spear, in terms of technology and finance, and you're kind of deep in fintech, and then you start to see, what blockchains can do. I guess over time it went from like 99% fintech, 1% crypto, and now it's, 100% crypto. But I think I first got the bug slightly later than you did. It was 2017, really just started kind of reading white papers, paying attention. I did wait for the new kind of tax year of 2018 to actually, dip the toes in. Yeah, once you do that first swap, and for me it was actually getting involved in some of those early Web3 video games. That was a pretty interesting aha moment. And once you get crypto pilled, right, it was the rest is history.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, with your plethora of experience in the TradFi world and this technology comes along, do you see it as a natural evolution of the internet and the way we are going to operate markets and things like that?
Yeah, definitely. I'm kind of in the camp that it's both an evolution and upgrade to the internet. I love that phrase that like one of the original sins of the internet, right, is that it didn't have the ability to send money. You can send an email anywhere in the world permissionlessly, but you can't do that with money. And I think at the time it was too hard of a computer science problem, the double spend problem. But since then with cryptography and blockchains, we've figured that out, right? So I do think it's an upgrade to the internet, and I always give a shout out to Chris Dixon's read write own and that kind of mental model. I think that's wonderful, as well as though an upgrade to our financial system. And so obviously at Franklin Templeton, we've kind of been sitting at the nexus of this. Having over 80 years, kind of, doing investment management, asset management on a global scale. And so that involves lots of ledgers, lots of, middle ops and back ops, and dealing with lots of different ways to move money and value around the world, and with respect to clients and assets. And so I think when we saw blockchain technology, right, it really was an aha moment on the financial system upgrade side, just as much as it was on the internet upgrade side.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe you could take us behind the curtain a bit because I'm very fascinated as to what your R&D process looks like when it comes to looking at new technology like blockchain. So let's say, you guys don't make decisions overnight. It's not like, oh, here's Bitcoin, let's right away start something. But I'm sure there's a lot of trial and error testing happening. So walk us through kind of the methodology of how you look at blockchain and these new technologies and new blockchains that are popping up in the market to look at to integrate them into your systems.
Yeah, definitely. So the origin story there, and I can't remember if my colleague Sandy Call had gone into it. I'll touch on it briefly, but be coming out of that kind of fintech roots, for us, we originally were running a validator on the Provenance blockchain, right? Which it traces back to, kind of Figure and Mike Cagney, who was the founder of Lending Club and SoFi. So we were running a validator on a blockchain as one does, and you end up with native coin on your balance sheet. And so in this case, in the case of the Provenance blockchain, we ended up with a bunch of hash. And then all of a sudden it was like, what is this new type of asset, a token? It's on our balance sheet. What is it worth? And so once you kind of, start pulling on that thread a little bit, a whole host of questions opens up. And so, I think initially it was the combination of necessity. We have to figure out what this is and how to value it, as well as, then, what can we do with it? So I think from a very early point in our kind of digital asset arc, I think we realized the need that, hey, there's a really powerful technology here. And being a global asset manager, like, what can we do with that technology? And like, is it a threat or is it an opportunity or is it both? And then we also recognize that, hey, you have this totally nascent, the buddings of what could be an asset class. And, fast forward to today, and it really does seem like a legitimate, its own asset class. At the time, it was just like, hey, maybe it could.
Mhm.
And so I think from inception, there were these two sides to our business. It was a curiosity to what can this technology do? And then a curiosity of, hey, if this evolves into like a new type of asset, I mean, that's pretty unique and special because it's not every day that a new asset class comes around, right? So I think that was the genesis, the origin story, and then I'll kick it back to you. We can talk about how we kind of evolve the ball or advance the ball in either of those two initiatives.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because it seems, to your point, we couldn't tell what this was initially, right? Is it just blockchain and just Rails,
Yeah.
or is it also an asset class? And it seems like it's both, right? Just this like next layer on the internet, but also this new asset class is introduced to it. And I remember folks were trying to go the private permission blockchain space where no need for a token. But I think more folks are realizing public blockchains are the way, and you do need the token to kind of grease the wheels and make sure everything works.
Yeah, definitely. I remember us having some early conversations around that very topic, and actually publishing some research on our thoughts on public blockchains and this sort of thing. I think giving a lot of credit to our own in-house blockchain engineers and just kind of big fans of open source software and the importance of that in prior technological movements. So I think realizing just how battle tested open source code can be. And then the way that the stack works, I think you can build say permission DeFi applications, on a permissionless chain, right? But it's harder to do the opposite, right? So I think from the onset, yeah, we gravitated towards these public chains, and right now are building on. I mean, I think it's upwards of 10, public blockchains and running nodes on all these chains too. So that idea of building on them on specifically on public blockchains and supporting consensus and validating transactions, very, very important to us to support these networks. And then as we think about new products to either put on those chains, or how do you then package some of these exposures so that clients who are interested in getting access to this technology, they have a kind of a menu of options for them as well.
I don't know if you can speak to this because it kind of gets behind the scenes, but there is some disruption that this technology brings, right? It makes things more efficient, it can lower costs and so forth. But let's say a business that Franklin Templeton runs, maybe this eats away at some of your revenue, and you're not the only one. Fidelity and all the other players, right? The BlackRock and so forth. But is there kind of a initial hit to, let's say, revenue, but then you find new revenue avenues with the technology, like being able to tokenize certain money market funds, and that recoups the revenue? I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah, it totally does. And I think from that investor mindset, which is really like, first and foremost, I'm an investor. We have all the builders on our side of the platform, that's not me. I'm more of the, investing mindset. So when I'm looking at like this technology or any one of these protocols, like I'm constantly asking like, what really is the value proposition here? And to your point, is the technology here a cost savings exercise? Or is there something new that can be done with it, in terms of enhanced utility or an additional revenue line? So is that value proposition strictly on the cost side, or is it also on this, additive revenue generating side? And so I think with respect to our own business, it was first and foremost like, wow, if we can bring the transfer agent function on chain, we can reduce a lot of those costs. And again, we have funds and stakeholders all over the world, right? So there's a lot of kind of leakage in the global financial system, and certainly us being a player, like we know this all too well. So there was a little bit of a light bulb going off there, but at the same time, not only by bringing something like a tokenized money market fund on chain and realizing those costs, we realized that blockchains afford new use cases, and this idea of programmable, composable money allows you to just do things that you couldn't do before. So this concept of intraday yield, right? It doesn't really exist in the old model, but now I could pay interest out daily, every second, right? And so if we transfer it, the yield goes with it. That concept of intraday yield is something new and really enabled by the blockchain, right? And then you hear from the payments folks, they're super interested because you can do streaming payments and micro payments and programmable payments, and by leveraging smart contracts. So this idea of, yes, it can bring down costs, and maybe in certain use cases, yeah, or maybe our firm is some of those costs, but I think it also enhances what you can do with money and value. And so that leads to kind of new revenue lines, which are pretty exciting.
yeah, absolutely. And to your point of new revenue lines, does it open up more liquidity to come into certain funds and products that you have because it's on the blockchain, it's trading 24/7, and for the first time, we can have truly global markets because let's say I know certain legislations being figured out, how we're going to handle all these things with global markets, 24/7 trading, tokenization. But let's say someone in Africa, in a country in Africa,
Yeah.
who couldn't access these products before, they have a smartphone, they've got some cash, and they're like, you know what? I like what Franklin Templeton's offering here. And they can do it because of the blockchain, and they don't have to go through all the crazy red tape that was there before.
Yeah, and I love those examples, right? Because you are democratizing access. And I think one theme right now is, democratizing, say, alternatives. But here we're just talking about, with a smartphone and an internet connection, you can have access to basic banking, that you wouldn't have in those parts of the world. So it really is, powerful. And as we think of, kind of where the world and the industry are headed, and if really, I just have this wallet that I take with me, and Sandy always talks about moving from that account view to the wallet view, and I just think that is 100% where to use the analogy, the puck is headed here, and the assets that you'll hold in that wallet will be your existing traditional assets. They'll be your crypto native assets, and then there's kind of hybrid assets too, and maybe it's your cultural assets. But again, it's in this wallet that you take with you. You own your data, you take them with you. And that's pretty powerful no matter where you are in the world.
Yeah, and I think a lot about that, the idea of the wallet replacing maybe some of the legacy things that we have with account numbers and
Right.
exactly what Sandy said. And then that wallet being interoperable with my devices, my
Yeah.
car, and it's like anywhere I go, it's sharing, pulling from the same wallet. I paid a toll. I'm driving on the highway. My fridge does something, right? All these little updates that are done, and it's coming seeding from the same wallet.
Yeah, definitely. I think since this industry kind of got started, people were imagining what could the actual total addressable market be for blockchain technology. And I think whatever those wild estimates were at the beginning, like you start to realize that yeah, you could actually provide a digital signature, not just for assets, but or financial assets, but for capital assets, for a whole host of things. As we just it gets to it's not just the financial system as the internet gets upgraded with this technology, and I think as it becomes abstracted away, right, it just becomes part of our infrastructure, and it affords us, kind of new tools. So I do think that addressable market, is quite bigger maybe than we all initially imagined.
Yeah, some of it seems like things from the movies and how everything will be connected, IoT, AI, crypto, blockchain. It seems we're at the well, I've been talking about it a lot. Fourth industrial revolution, you have the convergence of all these technologies and they complement each other. And, uh, I was just interviewing someone who's working on robots and AI and they're looking to
Yeah.
integrate blockchain. And yeah, robots are not going to use cash. If we're going to have
Right.
robots in our homes or in the factories 10 years from now, they're going to probably have a built-in wallet and use stable coins or some digital money.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, robots. I think of something physical, tangible, but even just agents, working on your behalf online, right? Absolutely. I doubt we're going to see ACH and fun wires, running around. It's probably gonna be, micropayments, riding around on blockchain rails. So I think that is the way it's headed.
Absolutely. Before we go further, I want
Yeah.
folks to know as much as possible what Franklin Templeton is doing with crypto, blockchain, and so forth. Can you run through all the initiatives you have going on right now?
Yeah, definitely. I'll start on the investment side of the house, and then we'll get to the building side of the house in case you want to double click on any of that.
Sure.
So look on the investing side, I think our kind of mindset or our philosophy is how do you develop kind of a full menu, right, to offer exposure to this underlying technology. So we're one of the ETF players, and we're really excited about like the spot ETF market in the US. It's we still only have the two approved, but it looks like more are coming. We're excited for this kind of hybrid space of taking the crypto native assets and kind of wrapping them in that traditional ETF wrapper and offering them out to clients, right? So that's exciting. I think we'll see a lot more there. And then and we think of that too as like a form of low cost beta, right? I mean, there's just so many good things about ETFs, but as you get your toes, you dip your toes in, sometimes you want, active management or something more discretionary. And so there we kind of are thinking about the world in terms of, okay, there's venture capital on the one side, and then you have, active management to figure out that whole tail of the long tail of kind of crypto assets, the tokens. So we have kind of private funds in those offerings. And so this is all on kind of the investing side of the house. And then on the building side of the house, it really started with that tokenized money market fund. And yeah, so the term Benji relates to, one Benji token is one share of ownership in this money market fund that's on chain and fully on chain. No duplicate, books and records off chain. It's fully on chain. And so I think it started with that. And really on one blockchain, one product, and so I guess kind of fast forward, and you couldn't do much with it. It was really like, it was fiat currency going in, and you could buy it and you could hold it, right? And so, where we've kind of come from there is expanding the number of blockchains that we're on, so kind of meeting the client where they're at. And so yeah, I think we're on, kind of eight plus blockchains right now, public blockchains. And then increasing the functionality. So that concept of intraday yield, the concept of being able to transfer this security token back and forth between us. These are things that were added later, like the ability to swap, your stable coins into Benji rather than just go fiat into it. So I think we're trying to enhance utility for the token.
Mm.
And then in parallel to putting it on more blockchains in different ecosystems, on the crypto side, we also want it in more jurisdictions around the world. So it was this interesting, how do you bring this to more places on chain and how do you bring it to more places around the world? And all while doing it in a regulatory compliant way. So I think a lot of the effort has been creating those pathways from a technological standpoint and a regulatory standpoint. And now that we kind of know how to do that, you can think about other funds or products or services that could travel through these same channels, right? So I think in terms of roadmap, there's still low-hanging fruit to do with Benji itself. The use case of Benji's also evolved. It originally was kind of more used for treasury management for crypto firms, for instance, DAOs and protocols, that sort of thing. It was used as some payments. And now it's really seen a lot of use as collateral. And so that's kind of an exciting use case that's evolved, right? So, excited with where that's headed. And I think the broader idea of this, tokenization of real world assets, putting them on chain, that is the opposite of the ETFization of the crypto native assets and bringing that off chain, right? So we think we're coming at it from both sides, and that whole space will just continue to kind of evolve and be pretty interesting.
Oh, for sure. Um, you mentioned there's about 8 to 10 blockchains that you've launched the tokenized fund on. Walk us through the process of selecting a blockchain. Are you looking at security, liquidity, the amount of users and activity and things like that?
Yeah, it's a great question because it really highlights kind of the synergy between different parts of our digital assets platform. So, on the one hand, you have the pure, kind of technology, like any Web3 founder is thinking about what chain should I build on, and so, they're absolutely approaching it from, well, what's the programming language and the tech stack, and what's our security of the chain look like? When was the last, kind of downtime incident, that sort of thing. And then there's well, where are the users? Where's the capital that actually desires, an on-chain money market fund, and what's the growth of these various ecosystems? And so, on the investment side, we're trying to figure out, which of these protocols are gaining market share or losing market share? What are those native coins worth? So we're looking at user cohorts and retention and fee activity and all of that, right? And then on the building side, we're doing this kind of in conjunction. They're going through smart contract audits and talking to developers and that sort of thing. And so we kind of come together to really talk about, where should we go next, right? And a lot of the work that we do on the investment side helps inform that process and vice versa.
Mm. And then I'm sure there's some similarities to the ETF products, selecting new altcoins to launch products around. I believe you folks have Solana, XRP, and some others applications in play. You probably can't talk much about it, but I'm just curious your methodology there.
Yeah, definitely. It is quite similar. And there we get a further collaboration between our kind of traditional ETF colleagues
Mm.
and the digital assets team. So, I think the whole launch of the ETF was such an amazing kind of collaboration, right, between TradFi and kind of DeFi. And I think as people are thinking through, how do you do some of these ETFs as a staked version, I think that's super interesting, right? Because there's just a lot of open questions that need to be kind of, figured out. And that really does take the combination of, people who understand it, crypto natively and from our, say, node operations perspective to, how do you integrate this into, TradFi? Because at the end of the day, it's an ETF and, it's going to have liquidity and that sort of thing. So it's a great kind of collaborative discussion there. And yeah, you mentioned, some of the ones we have in application and the ones in kind of production, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and then we also have easy peasy. It does kind of a market cap weighted of the two of them. And the idea is as more get approved, right, this thing could evolve and start to look like almost like an index fund, of crypto.
In the early days of crypto, and I consider myself an early adopter, the way to get access to this asset class was simply going to Coinbase or some exchange,
Yeah.
buying the asset, keeping it on Coinbase or putting it on a hardware wallet.
Right.
But now with these ETF products, do you believe these will become the biggest on-ramps, given that there's already an infrastructure in TradFi,
Yeah.
retirement accounts, and all these things? RIAs and wealth managers are going to say they're not going to buy it directly for the client, but go through the ETF route. Do you think the ETFs become the biggest on-ramp for this asset class?
Yeah, I think they become one of the big ones, but it's so fascinating because I think there are like pros and cons to all these different wrappers, right? And so while I mean, you have to choose one first, right? And so I know plenty of people, as I'm sure you do, they first came into this through kind of self-custody or through a centralized exchange but now they're coming in, through the ETF. But they start there. And then I think and maybe they start with Bitcoin, right? And just like once you start with Bitcoin, after a while, you kind of get curious about some other things too. I think once you start with one of these wrappers and understand its pros and cons, you realize yeah, there's benefits to all these different kind of wrappers and avenues. And so I don't think one is gonna kind of trump, others, so to speak, or be like the end all be all. But I think you'll see people use these for different, reasons. So, when it's spot, even on an exchange, right? But right now we don't have a wash sale rule for crypto. If it's in an ETF, though, I can put that into a tax advantaged account. Obviously, with respect to do I need to memorize my keys or not? Am I okay? So am I really okay with self custody, or am I okay having someone help me with that? With ETFs, kind of easier to write covered calls. I mean, there's just so many different kind of nuances to all these different kind of wrappers. And having that crypto exposure sit next to my traditional assets, again, because we're still in that account view world, not fully in the wallet view world yet, but heading there, right? So I think there's pros and cons to all these different kind of avenues, channels.
Yeah, for sure. And then the second question was you mentioned the index, and
Yeah.
right now just Bitcoin and Ether, but as the other altcoin ETFs get approved, we can see those assets get added to the index ETF. And what we've seen for a long time, the index have performed better or they're larger than the individual stocks. So you can get exposure to S&P 500 or the NASDAQ.
Mhm.
Do you think it's going to be the same thing where these index ETFs become larger than the individual ETFs?
Yeah, they certainly could. I think it'll be interesting to see because unlike a company that can say, go bankrupt, a protocol and its market cap, it can hang around, right? Through cycles. And maybe there's some, market cap erosion to some of its competitors, but it can still have a decent valuation for quite a while. So it'll be interesting to see if an index that just takes all of these, whatever happens to be in the top 10 without any kind of overlay or rule-based system or any kind of discretion around it. It'll be interesting to see if those really take off or if it will continue to be kind of like it is in the spot market where maybe not tribal is not the right word, but there's definitely camps that have their favorite, ecosystem
Yeah.
or coin. And so I wonder if we'll see that kind of loyalty with respect to the ETF options as we see, with holding it, spot. That'll be interesting. And then I think to your question about the ETF as a type of buyer and growing in size and where will that go? And I think that's super fascinating to keep an eye on it. And then obviously in recent news, we have a new type of buyer, the corporation or the digital asset treasury company. And it's really these two types of buyers almost in tandem, right? The ETF complex on the one side, and now this group of treasury companies on the other side, kind of buying up, and it's making this cycle feel a little different. It's feeling a little bit more, institutional than in perhaps prior cycles. I mean, I guess the nature of that marginal buyer is changing, kind of this time around.
Yeah, it definitely feels like institutions are leading the charge this time around. Not to say retail's not involved, and I believe retail is going to be coming, I think, soon as this market heats up into the fall. But it feels like institutions are leading the charge here, and it's like they've had that moment, that aha moment, and they're all going in. Obviously, just like Franklin Templeton launching ETFs, building. It's exciting to watch that play out. So I guess a good question or a good segue is to crypto legislation and how that affects what Franklin Templeton's doing. I guess we can start with the Genius Act, with that being passed into law, the stablecoin bill. What does that mean for Franklin Templeton?
Yeah, so I think that's huge because, well, I mean, look, first time lawmakers carved a week out to really kind of focus on crypto legislation. I mean, that's amazing, and to get, the progress that was made, kind of across the bills, but especially Genius Act getting signed into law and really having that regulatory framework for stablecoins in particular. I think that's huge. So. Um, and stable coins, obviously, they need to be now, part of the rules. It's got to be backed, one for one and certain type of collateral. This is all quite bullish for the US dollar. Also quite bullish for money market, money market funds,
Yeah.
and treasuries in general, right? So, but having that framework, I think is just huge because now, infrastructure providers, can really kind of embrace this and innovate and iterate on different kind of what you can do with this, and they don't have to worry about kind of regulation by enforcement, right? We have clear rules. But what's interesting though is we don't have rules yet for the rails that these stablecoins travel on, right? So obviously that's coming next. So while Genius was tremendous, I think it is tip of the iceberg. Obviously, there's more coming. And hopefully this is just a trend that will continue and a tailwind that will really kind of continue for the industry.
I don't know if you can answer this, but I got to ask, are you looking at launching your own stablecoin, or will you just be using the stablecoins that are out there?
I think in general we're going to see. I mean, the banks are clearly interested. I think we're going to see like lots of different types of firms, launch their own stable coin, and they'll be almost like a brand connected to it. I think the key though, right, is obviously there has to be enough liquidity between all these stable coins. Yes, they're all back one for one $5, but if the supply demand dynamics for a more niche stable coin, like if the depth isn't there, it could be it could trade a little off of a dollar, right, just because of supply demand dynamics. So one of the things I think we're interested in keeping a close eye on is what are all the stable coins that are coming out, being launched by who, how are they able to kind of build that liquidity. And then also, I think so important in crypto, right? It's not just building the first thing, but you got to integrate it into the rest of it to really take advantage of the composability of crypto and blockchain. So, I think we are going to see lots of different types of players launch their own stablecoin. But that's something I'll be, curious to follow and track, and I guess we'll see how it progresses.
Yeah, because it's your point, just launching a stablecoin without the distribution or the proper
Yeah,
network, it's not. And I think of like Circle, partnering with Coinbase, that strategic partnership, and Coinbase helped with the distribution of USDC.
sure.
I think that really helped USDC. But yeah, we'll see. It looks like everybody and their grandma is going to launch a stablecoin, and there might need to be some consolidation at some point.
Yeah, definitely. And I think obviously there's some fine print around not everybody can launch a stablecoin, but I think we're going to see white label solutions and other thing. I do think it's going to be an interesting kind of trend to follow. Who's actually launching them? Who's helping with the building that out, and then how is that all connecting to form the liquidity and the integrations to really kind of get the flywheel going.
Hmm. You mentioned the market structure bill, right? You alluded to it, the Clarity Act that is set to pass in September. Knock on wood. Hopefully that gets done. Congress pushes it through. President Trump signs it into law. Do you think that's just going to unlock incredible innovation and building in this technology and industry? Because once again, no regulation by enforcement. You don't have to look over your
Yeah.
shoulder. You can just be heads down building.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important, and I do think right there is it seems like there's also more work to be done there. I mean, I'm sure the Senate's going to have some changes and there'll be, iterations, but I am optimistic like you are. I think we'll see, positive momentum resume here in the fall when they kind of come back and so super encouraged by I think what can actually get done, here in the balance of the year. And then what it means for the industry because we've got the framework for stable coins as kind of digital programmable money. If we can get the right, framework around the protocols themselves, those execution environments, the blockchains, but also, what it means to be an application building on these chains. I think that's huge. And how the regulation works. Because quite frankly, that has held, I think, some of the innovation back, certainly in this country. So very much looking forward to that. There'll just be a continued, kind of tailwind, I think, for the industry.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to get your perspective on you and your competitors on in the TradFi world in this race to now adopt this technology. And uh, I know you probably can't give away too much, but I'm curious, what are you looking at? What are you thinking about? Are you paying attention to what, your fellow competitors are doing? And um, is it a race? Do you feel the same way? From my outside view, it looks that way, but how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean the first thing that pops in my mind is, I mean, one of the benefits of kind of being at the cutting edge of still a small industry is, it's so much more collaborative, I would say, than it feels so much more collaborative than competitive, So my peers at all of our kind of, peer firms, we're all trying to kind of push the industry forward together, right? And a lot of times we are talking to the same clients and we're doing it, globally. And so often, I'm in a room and I'm not even like pitching product, right? I'm just educating about what blockchains can do, what digital assets are, how we think, how an institutional kind of asset manager thinks about valuation and fundamentals in this space, where we think it's going, what we're seeing in the innovation pipeline. It's really just doing education, right? And then, my peers are doing that as well. And it is a nuanced technical industry. It's still nascent. And so I think all this education is super important, right? You kind of need to hear it a few different times in a few different ways and have that kind of surround sound. And then you kind of need to see it have the Lindy effect and kind of make it through a few cycles before you can start to wrap your head around it, get comfortable with it, and that sort of thing. So, on the one hand, it sometimes feels, competitive looking at, flows or whatnot, but really it is much more, I think, collaborative. A lot of time we're on the same panels as each other.
Mm.
Again, we're talking to the same clients and around the world, and I think in terms of product too, right? Everybody's innovating, and so I think that's that's like the great thing, right? So those are my general. I'm sure you maybe wanted something a little bit spicier than that, but it is quite collaborative. And I think that goes back to it's still early, we're all trying to kind of move this thing forward together.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So on that note, we got crypto legislation, the stablecoin bill passed, of course, but the Clarity Act is the big one. Let's say
Yeah.
that gets passed, and look, it's going to take time for you and your competitors to uh, hit the ground running fully. There's a lot of trial and error testing, R&D, and so forth. When do you think we will be at a point of maturation where it's ready for full mainstream adoption? So where the average Joe and Jane walking down the street may not be as tech savvy, they're not part of the early adopter crowd, but it gets to a point where it feels like Web 2, but it's powered by Web 3, and they're getting all these additional benefits. Is it 2030 or beyond that?
Yeah, I think so having the right regulatory frameworks is huge. And then with that extra clarity, you can fill in some of the gaps that exist in the infrastructure, right? To make this as seamless as I think where your vision's going. So I think those are some critical next steps. And then in terms of continuing to onboard new types of people. And one of the amazing things with crypto, right? It's it's not just something you buy and hold and put it on a shelf, right? Crypto is meant to be used. And so it's one thing to onboard someone in terms of, okay, now it's part of the portfolio.
Mm.
It's another to onboard them into using it and realizing firsthand some of those benefits. And that a lot of times comes second, right? So I think a lot of times, they have a they own it first and then they use it. And so I think, in terms of flows, we'll see more people open their mind and embrace it as a legitimate asset class and understand its role in the portfolio. And what's interesting, right, is we don't think, necessarily Bitcoin plays the same role in a portfolio that, say, some other digital assets. So once you kind of figure out where it's going, what are you funding it with, and how are you sizing it appropriately? What's your time horizon? And then you make the investment. Then I think you start to do more, maybe round out that investment or start to kind of use it and play with it. And then I think as we move from this world of account view to digital wallet view, it goes back to that infrastructure point. Some more things need to be built out, I think, to make this work. And so I think that part will take a little bit more time. 2030, though, the cool thing about exponential technologies is it does move quickly. But I think we'll get some good stuff done by 2030 for sure.
Yeah, because I still see, more of the infrastructure needs to be built out
Yeah.
for like, just thinking about like my mom and dad and not
Sure,
tech
yeah.
savvy, older, but the adoption might come through their banks because they trust the bank they store their money in. Um, or maybe a social app. They use YouTube and Facebook. I don't know. It's fascinating, and I don't know what that's going to look like. Um, but maybe it's through the banks because that's an institution they trust, and it would fit in that a category of finance and investments.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it will become more abstracted away, right? Like if we think about who are the power DeFi users five years from now, it very much, right? It could be the institutions, it could be banks and asset managers, and actually using DeFi the most, and they're using it kind of behind the scenes. I think you're always going to have a strong kind of retail component, who absolutely loves rolling up the sleeves and getting kind of dirty with all these different protocols and trying out the latest thing. But in terms of swaps and borrow lend and some of the more kind of newer and more exotic features that DeFi enables. It might be institutions at the end of the day, right? Being the actual power users of those protocols.
Do you think that they could do it instead of well, they can give the option of, hey, we'll do the whole DeFi setup here and earn this additional yield for you. Obviously, the banks and these institutions will take a cut, but it'll be easy. The person who's a client or a customer of the bank won't have to think about these things. And they're like, you know what, this is too much for me. But if the bank does it for me, that sounds cool.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's definitely part of the value proposition is simplifying this, making it easy. I've heard some models where you even have a phone number to call, like right, like it's just like what does customer service look like in a product that uses kind of DeFi in the back end, but with some kind of more white glove service on the front end, for whatever client end market. I think it's a design space that will continue to evolve. I think the key is, and this is where the regulatory comes in, right? It's one thing for the software to just, kind of work, and that has its own regulatory framework. But as soon as there's kind of a centralized actor in there, performing some value-added service, supposedly on top of this, I just think that, right, obviously proper oversight and controls around all this. But I think in terms of the design space, a lot can be done, and that can help onboard new users as well.
Mm. What's on your roadmap? What can you share, and what can we expect over the next 6 months or so?
Yeah, well, I think as a firm, I think kind of going back to our kind of twofold model of being builders in the space, customers of these blockchains, users, and trying to do more with our existing product lineup through kind of the Benji suite, so to speak. maybe bringing new products into those kind of channels that we've built out now, as well as on the investing side. I think helping with the education and onboarding more clients into crypto who will embrace digital assets as an asset class in their portfolio construction. I think there's certainly a lot to keep busy on on both sides. So I'll probably be spending more of my kind of time on the investment side. But again, what I love about kind of just the way we built up this platform, we work hand in hand, right, with those in-house blockchain engineers, and not just in terms of feedback, but also thinking about kind of where it's all going. Trying to actualize Sandy Call's kind of vision. And so I think a fun road ahead.
Well, I love it. I followed Franklin Templeton for many years, and you guys have certainly been ahead of the curve in many ways with this technology. So I'm excited to see what rolls out next, and have you back on talk about the new products and services and things like that. I got some wrap-up questions here for you. First, if you
Sure.
could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be?
Ooh. Um, it would definitely be something in, I think, the video game space. As I mentioned, that was where I first got real crypto pilled, back in the Axie Infinity days and the parallel card game. Before there was a game, right? People just collected the cards. I've since kind of played it with my son, who's an avid Pokemon fan. So I think a metaverse that I would either design or want to spend time in, especially as I think about bringing my kids in more into kind of crypto. I think using the video game type of metaverse is a great, kind of Trojan horse, if you will, to get them exposure to this new type of technology.
Oh, for sure. Rapid fire questions. Favorite food?
Um, Korean
Favorite
barbecue.
for Korean barbecue? Yeah, I love Korean
Yeah.
barbecue as well. Favorite musician or band?
Um, Sublime and Modest Yahoo, kind of, I like that genre.
Nice. Favorite movie?
Uh, there I go with this Matt Damon duo of Good Will Hunting and Rounders.
Good Will Hunting. I mean, just a great movie. I don't think I've ever seen Rounders. I gotta check that out.
Oh, it's fantastic. Uh,
I, I
and most people get into poker, or they did, of my generation, either when Chris Moneymaker, won the World Series of Poker on ESPN the first time it was televised, or by watching the movie Rounders. And I got in through the movie Rounders.
I'm gonna watch it tonight. I'm gonna check it out. Favorite book?
Um, Tale Two Cities.
Hmm. And when you're not working at Franklin Templeton, what are you doing for fun?
Playing with my kids. And I do like poker a lot, as kind of alluded to, and I like outdoor cooking. I have four different types of barbecue grill cooker apparatus in the backyard, and I like outdoor cooking.
Well, I'm weird there with you because I have a regular size grill, but then I just bought a griddle for outside, so I've been
Love it.
cooking up more outside. So,
We'll do it.
Christopher, pleasure chatting with you. Love what Franklin Temple is doing in the digital asset blockchain space. Thank you so much for joining me. And like I said, I'd love to have you back on as new things are launched on your front.
Thanks, Tony. Take care.